When the internationally acclaimed pianist Alexander Pierce summoned the modest black woman, Sophia Bennett, onto the stage as part of a cruel joke, he was convinced it would be her moment of absolute disgrace. Yet what unfolded next left every individual inside that luxurious concert venue completely stunned. At times, the most remarkable gifts remain concealed behind the most ordinary exteriors. And it often takes just one instant to alter the course of everything forever. Alexander Pierce, the most prominent white concert pianist in New York, was regarded as the embodiment of musical brilliance. Praised by critics as the epitome of artistic perfection, he exuded unwavering self-assurance. His silver-streaked hair was immaculately styled, and his penetrating stare radiated self-importance. He relished the extravagant accolades and fervent admiration of the social elite as though they were his natural due. Yet amid all that grandeur, nobody noticed the small figure diligently laboring in the shadows behind the stage. A black woman named Sophia Bennett was painstakingly polishing the grand piano, her touch so delicate it seemed she feared even the slightest error might blemish its flawless surface. Sophia adored that instrument and the magical sounds it could produce. But she was painfully aware of her standing in this glittering realm. To the audience gathered there, she was invisible, hardly worthy of a passing look. A gentle chime sounded, announcing the start of the concert. The crowd settled into their seats, eyes riveted on the brilliantly illuminated stage. Alexander Pierce stepped onto the podium, each movement greeted by roaring applause reverberating throughout the opulent hall. Everything was prepared for a performance destined to be unforgettable. Yet neither Pierce nor the hundreds of distinguished attendees could have anticipated what was about to transpire, a moment that would irrevocably change the lives of everyone. Inside that magnificent concert hall, while the spectators were still enveloped in the roaring applause that welcomed Alexander Pierce in a dim recess far backstage, beyond the reach of spotlights or admiring gazes, Sophia Bennett continued her quiet work, tenderly wiping away every trace of dust from the gleaming black grand piano with a soft cloth. She moved with remarkable caution, as though that piano was the only priceless jewel she was ever permitted to handle in this dazzling world. Sophia was a black woman in her early 30s, petite in stature, with a gentle face and eyes carrying a deep sorrow that few ever cared to notice. She did not possess the striking beauty of the elegantly dressed women seated in the audience. Instead, she radiated a simple, humble grace, her dark curls loosely gathered at the back of her neck. Her worn, cream-colored sweater and faded gray skirt plainly reflected her circumstances and social standing. Any glance that fell on her was fleeting long enough only to confirm an undeniable truth. She did not belong here. Since childhood, Sophia had poured her soul into music. Her late father, an amateur pianist, used to play Chopin's haunting nocturnes each evening after long days working in a modest Brooklyn auto garage. Their tiny apartment could hardly contain the grand aspirations inspired by his music, yet those nightly pieces were Sophia's only sanctuary, the soul beautiful. The world she knew, after he passed away. Those melodies became her most cherished and most painful inheritance. Her dream of becoming a concert pianist was quickly crushed beneath life's harsh realities. Lacking both money and opportunity, she accepted any work she could find just to keep a roof over her head in a cramped Harlem apartment. Securing this cleaning job at Carnegie Hall had felt like an unexpected stroke of fortune, though she understood she would never truly belong to the world of high art she so admired from afar each morning. Sophia arrived at Carnegie Hall well before sunrise, when the grand building lay silent and empty. In those quiet hours, she allowed herself to lightly glide her calloused fingers over the piano keys, if only to savor a fleeting taste of the dream she had once held. The notes she coaxed forth were barely audible, as if she feared awakening the stark reality that she was merely a caretaker and nothing more. Before other staff members appeared, she would slip away to resume her cleaning duties, preparing the stage for celebrated artists she would never be among. But today, as she completed her final polish of the keys, a chilly voice sliced through the silence, yanking her back into the present. "Be careful with that. Do you even know how much this piano costs?" Startled, Sophia spun around, her heart pounding as she realized Alexander Pierce was standing just behind her, his eyes cold and brimming with suspicion. His icy blue stare swept over her with disdain and annoyance. To him, the sight of a woman tending the piano he was about to perform on, was utterly intolerable. "I'm sorry, sir," Sophia murmured, lowering her gaze to the floor to avoid his searing look. "I only wanted to make sure everything was perfect." "Perfect," Alexander scoffed, crossing his arms. "Do you even understand what perfection means? People like you shouldn't be allowed anywhere near instruments meant for true masters. Now, step aside and do your job." Words abandoned Sophia as the sting of his cruel insult sank in. She was accustomed to being invisible, used to silent contempt. But this affront pierced her more deeply, wounding both her cherished dreams and the memory of her father. Bowing her head gently, she retreated, yielding the piano to Pierce, who immediately began inspecting it as though her touch had defiled its purity. In that moment, Sophia felt smaller than ever. She slipped behind the curtain, disappearing into her unseen world, her heart aching with the realization that to this society, she was nothing but a diminutive black woman, unworthy of sharing in an artistic dream. Yet, amid the pain, faint ember glowed a quiet determination she had never fully acknowledged until this instant. Out on the brightly lit stage, Alexander Pierce launched into his next piece as fresh waves of applause swept over him. Behind the scenes, Sophia stood concealed, tears shimmering in her eyes, yet burning with resolve. One day, she vowed, the world would understand how gravely mistaken they were to dismiss her. One day, maybe today. Maybe tomorrow, she would emerge from the shadows and claim the dream that rightfully belonged to her. From behind the deep crimson velvet curtain, the rich, resonant tones of the grand piano at Carnegie Hall began to envelop the audience in a hush of reverence, yet Sophia's spirit found no peace. Alexander's cold words still stabbed at her pride like knives. Alexander Pierce, celebrated far and wide as a virtuoso, carried a simmering anger as he seated himself. Before the instrument, his finely tailored suit hugged his tall, imposing figure. His sharp features bore their usual arrogance. As his fingers brushed the keys, he should have been utterly absorbed in the music. But his thoughts remained fixed on the black woman whose roughened hands had just touched his prized piano. He could not comprehend why someone beneath him, mere servant, had dared to place a single finger on the instrument that, to him, symbolized social standing, refined taste, and everything of true worth he possessed. To allow her to touch something so sacred was, in his eyes, an unforgivable violation. Alexander prided himself on achieving success through talent and relentless effort. Yet deep within, he clung to the belief that people like Sophia Thos, from the lowest tiers of society, especially black individuals, were entirely undeserving and incapable of grasping the art he devoted his life to. To him, she was little more than dirt that had to be swept away each morning. His prejudice ran so deep that he felt everyone ought to remain in their assigned place. People like Sophia, black and working class, should accept their fate and never dream of reaching for things beyond their station. Her admiration for the piano only intensified his fury, as though it dared to challenge the lofty convictions he held as absolute truth. Partway through the first piece, Alexander shot a sharp glance toward the wings and caught sight of Sophia still standing there, unmoving, a furrow forming on his brow. A flicker of irritation rippled through his poised hands hovering above the keys. Her lingering presence felt like an affront, as though his sublime music was somehow being defiled by someone he deemed wholly unworthy. That thought only fueled his determination to teach her a harsh lesson, a reminder of the invisible yet unmistakable boundaries she must never dare to cross. In Alexander's mind, music was never meant for everyone. It was reserved solely for those of true talent and rightful status. People such as Sophia ought to know their place and refrain from touching things they could never truly value. Meanwhile, Sophia remained perfectly still, struggling to hold back the tears threatening to fall. Pike's scornful words, "This piano is worth more than your whole life," kept reverberating in her mind. Her chest ached, not only from The insult, but also from the brutal prejudice crushing her very existence. Yet amid that agony, something began to awaken inside her. A quiet defiance, a determination driven by the need to prove to this narrow-minded world just how mistaken they were. As the music soared and the audience burst into applause, Alexander reveled in his victory. Unaware that his arrogance and disdain had sparked within Sophia a relentless fire, one destined to blaze forth with a power neither of them could have, foreseen, forever altering both their lives. The piano's voice continued its ascent, slicing through the dense wave of applause and admiring stares. Each Chopin phrase poured directly into the souls of the listeners, guiding them through subtle, emotional depths. Alexander's long, pale fingers glided gracefully and effortlessly over the keys, as though music flowed from him without the slightest exertion. This was the pinnacle of artistry that his privileged audience craved. They were completely mesmerized by the flawless technique and the masterful performance unfolding before them. In that moment, Sophia lingered in the dimly lit back corner of the hall, her heart torn between the sting of humiliation and the sublime beauty of the music filling the space. She scarcely registered the prejudice or pain any longer. Eyes stayed locked on every elegant movement Alexander made. Almost without realizing it, she lifted her own calloused hands, as if she were playing the cherished piece her father once loved. Amid the entrancing melody, Alexander glanced again toward the rear of the auditorium. He froze for a fraction of a second when he spotted Sophia utterly spellbound, her hands moving in time with each note and emotion pouring from him. Instead of compassion, he felt a mounting annoyance. To him, this was an audacious affront, a silent assertion that this lowly woman somehow grasped an art reserved only for the elite. He forced himself to concentrate on his performance, but the image of Sophia's rapt gaze and synchronized hands tormented him. He couldn't endure the notion that someone like her might comprehend even a sliver of the noble music he performed. This wasn't merely an injury to his pride, it was a glaring reminder of the prejudice he cloaked beneath his polished demeanor, that people like Sophia ought to stay silent and in their designated place. When the final notes faded away, the hall exploded into thunderous applause. The audience leapt to their feet, showering the pianist with praise for a flawless performance. Alexander stood and inclined his head politely, a smug grin betraying how profoundly he delighted in the acclaim he believed he rightly deserved. Yet, as the stage lights bathed his confident features, his gaze flicked once again toward the shadowy corner where Sophia remained. His satisfaction vanished, replaced by sharp frustration. Her authentic passion seemed to mock his authority and social standing. He couldn't bear the thought that even for a brief instant she might have truly understood his music. Alexander curled his lip into a frosty smirk, silently swearing that he would never permit that lowly black woman to overstep her boundaries again. On this very night, of all nights, he would teach her a lesson about knowing her place, one she would never forget. When the final waves of applause eventually subsided, Alexander allowed a self-satisfied grin to spread across his face as he rose lightly from the bench. But rather than bowing as usual, he abruptly fixed a malicious stare on the far corner of the hall where Sophia lingered, hidden in the shadows. In an instant, the formal atmosphere shifted into one of tense curiosity. Everyone sensed that Alexander was about to do something out of the ordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with icy clarity through the hall, his sinister smile unbroken. "Tonight, we're privileged to have a very special audience member who's been watching with extraordinary focus." He gestured with a gentlemanly yet chilling sweep of his hand toward Sophia, who shrank deeper into the darkness. Hundreds of eyes swung toward her at once, full of curiosity and thinly veiled derision. "Why don't you come up here and try a piece?" Alexander continued, each syllable dripping like a knife dipped in honey. "Who knows? You might prove better at this than you are at dusting." A wave of sneering laughter rippled through the crowd like wildfire, igniting a fierce humiliation. In Sophia's chest, her cheeks burned hot and her labor-roughened hands trembled as she clutched the polishing cloth, her heart pounding so wildly she feared it might burst. She could hardly believe Alexander would publicly degrade her. before the city's most refined and influential people, standing at center stage beneath the brilliant lights. Alexander savored the bewilderment and embarrassment etched across Sophia's features. He felt a gloating triumph, as though this was perfect revenge for what he viewed as her insolence when she'd watched him so intently during the performance. To him, she needed a lesson about her proper role in the world, lowly, confined to the shadows. Some in the audience, who at first laughed along, gradually sensed the cruelty hidden in his words. A few exchanged uneasy looks, though most remained riveted, eager to witness what might happen next. After all, they cared little for the feelings of an anonymous servant, especially a black woman whose name they didn't even know. In that charged, uneasy instant, Sophia desperately wished to flee, to run far from those mocking stares and murmured jeers. Yet her legs felt rooted to the spot under the crushing weight of her sorrow and growing fury. She could no longer bear such injustice and cruelty for another moment. Alexander continued to challenge her with his stare, as though observing a play unfold. He fully expected her to retreat, to slip away in shame, return to her lowly station, and never dare disturb or defy him again. But amidst the cruel laughter and prying eyes, a fierce anger blazed to life within Sophia, an emotion she'd never before felt so powerfully. She recalled her late father's words that a person's dignity depends not on skin color or social class, but on the courage to stand against wrongs. At that very instant, Sophia lifted her chin. Her gaze transformed from fear to determined resolve. She stared back at Alexander, no longer with timid submission. And for the first time all night, his confident smile faltered. He sensed something utterly unexpected, a silent challenge, a blazing fire in the eyes of this small black woman he'd always dismissed. In that moment, the entire auditorium fell into an uneasy hush. As everyone sensed that this grand concert was about to veer into territory none of them could have foreseen. In the strange silence hanging over the hall, Sophia nearly gave in, tempted to whirl around and flee at once to escape those probing, mocking eyes. But just as the impulse to surrender flickered through her mind, her father's warm, steady voice rang in her memory like a gentle yet commanding reminder. "Never let anyone else determine your worth," his words, repeated to her countless times. Whenever she struggled, now rang clearer than ever, flooding her with a surge of strength she'd never known she possessed. Sophia's trembling fingers loosened their grip on the polishing cloth. Her heart pounded ferociously, but this time driven not by fear or shame, but by resolve and self-respect. Drawing a deep breath, she lifted her chin and fixed her gaze on Alexander, stepping out of the shadows where she had cowered. Her legs quivered at first, but grew more solid with every step. The murmurs in the crowd fell silent as hundreds of astonished eyes turned toward the small black woman moving onto the stage. Her footsteps echoed like the triumphant drum beats of a warrior's march. Each stride was more than merely approaching the piano. It was a daring challenge to all the prejudice Alexander had sown in the audience's minds. Sophia understood she was doing more than simply standing up for her own value. She was also paying tribute to her father's memory and the lesson he'd instilled in her, that true dignity has nothing to do with skin color or social standing. Up on stage, Alexander's face momentarily displayed stunned disbelief before morphing into a mocking grin. He'd never expected that she would dare accept his challenge. To him, her decision seemed like a last-ditch, desperate grasp at fleeting recognition. He was fully convinced that within minutes, she would falter and retreat back into the obscurity he believed was her rightful place. "Well, bravo," he jeered, slowly clapping as she approached. "Looks like we're in for quite a show." The crowd, picking up on Alexander's contempt, began murmuring and sneering among themselves. Yet Sophia ignored them completely. She stood before the same piano she had meticulously polished only a short while earlier, letting her fingers drift over its shining wooden surface as if touching a dream she'd once thought forever unattainable. At that moment, the dazzling luxury of the grand hall seemed to fade away, leaving only the steady beat of her heart and the cherished memories of her father's musical teachings. Turning toward Alexander, she looked directly into his cold blue eyes, her expression steady and firm, and declared, I will play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. A ripple of shocked whispers coursed through the audience. The piece was no casual selection. It was a formidable challenge even for accomplished pianists. Alexander's lips twisted in scornful surprise before he let out a derisive laugh. My, how ambitious! He mocked, his eyes glittering with cruel anticipation. He was absolutely certain Sophia was about to embarrass herself spectacularly. A moment he eagerly anticipated as further proof of his own superiority. But Sophia offered no response. She seated herself at the piano, drew a deep breath, and set her worn but determined hands onto the keys. Instantly, the audience fell into a tense hush, riveted by the suspense hanging in the air. No one dared laugh now. Uncertainty gripped them. As they waited to see what would happen next, and as Sophia pressed down the first chords, it was as if the entire hall collectively held its breath. Alexander, though maintaining his sneer, felt a flicker of unexpected unease ripple through him, disquieting, sense that something powerful and authentic was surging through the room, something his own performances had never been able to summon. In that moment, he began to suspect he might have made the gravest mistake of his life. Sophia's composed yet unwavering voice carried through the silent, elegant hall like an unexpected declaration, silencing even the final whispers in the audience. Curious ridicule shifted into astonished uncertainty and eager interest. Alexander, standing nearby, appeared equally taken aback. The sneer slid from his face, replaced by a look of furrowed worry and disbelief he had never imagined. She'd even know the name of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, let alone have the audacity to perform it. To Alexander, it was a complex, it's an intricate masterpiece, requiring decades of disciplined practice and mastery. How could a black woman, who only moments earlier had been gripping a cleaning cloth, dare lay claim to such a piece? Folding his arms tightly, he convinced himself this had to be nothing but an illusion, a fleeting impulse from Sophia that would soon collapse under the weight of reality. Yet the instant, black and white keys, something extraordinary happened. From the very first notes, the grand hall fell into a stunned, breathless silence. It was nothing like the hesitant, clumsy playing Alexander had anticipated. Instead, the music flowed out with strength, precision, and haunting beauty, like a cool, clear stream rushing through every corner of the opulent space. Every note Sophia played was perfect, infused with deep, genuine feeling far beyond anything the audience had ever experienced. Her sincerity radiated through her. Delicate yet decisive hand movements, and her face, once hidden in the shadows, now shone with the passion ignited by her performance. The entire crowd found themselves utterly captivated by the world of music. She conjured a world full of sorrow, yet brimming with hope. Alive with an authenticity they had never sensed during Alexander's performances. Alexander remained motionless, unable to believe what his eyes and ears were witnessing. He had always believed himself to be the pinnacle of pianistic artistry, certain that he stood at the summit of musical excellence. But now, standing before an audience that had once revered him, was this petite black woman he had publicly ridiculed, producing music far surpassing anything he'd ever achieved. A surge of fear and anger welled up inside him as he realized each note Sophia played was quietly dismantling the prejudices and hollow pride on which he'd built his arrogance. The smug pride vanished entirely from Alexander's expression, placed by sheer confusion and disbelief. He stepped back, unable to hold Sophia's gaze. Her brilliant performance felt like a crushing blow to his ego, stripping away the illusion of superiority he had so long wrapped around himself. Meanwhile, the audience had all but forgotten the celebrated artist who had performed moments earlier. Now, they were entirely enraptured, mesmerized by Sophia's extraordinary and unexpected brilliance. They looked at her no longer with scorn or derision, but with newfound respect and admiration. This was the moment that shattered every assumption and bias it brought with them into the hall. For Sophia, utterly absorbed in her playing, eyes gently closed. Nothing else existed but the music. It was the same force that had saved her from the pain of her past, and was now restoring her sense of self-worth. Each phrase she played was more than just a testament to her talent. It It was a heartfelt homage to her late father, who had taught her to believe in her own strength and value. The piano's voice swelled with brightness, power, and profound emotion, leaving a deep, reverent silence lingering over every person present. That night, not only Alexander Pierce, but the entire resplendent hall had to face an undeniable truth, that true artistry and the beauty of music could never be restrained by race or social class. The woman once ridiculed as nothing more than a joke was now overturning deeply rooted prejudices through the sheer power and magnificence of the music she was creating. The astonishing notes pouring from Sophia's fingers continued to echo through the hall, sweeping away doubt and derision like a rising tide. Her music carried a raw and honest truth, the suffering of years spent enduring silent scorn, the burning desire to emerge from the shadows, and the quiet hope her father had woven into every melody. These powerful emotions seemed to strike directly at the hearts of everyone listening, awakening something profound within their souls. The audience found themselves transported into a realm where all divisions of race, class, and status vanished. Many were moved to tears as they listened. Even though they'd arrived curious and dismissive of the lowly black woman whom Alexander had once mocked so publicly, their former contempt melted away, replaced by, above all, a deep sense of shame for the prejudices they'd once harbored. Alexander stood frozen, like a statue chiseled from stone, his face an astonished mask of shock and disbelief. He had never dreamed such a moment would come. He could never have imagined that the very woman he had scorned and humiliated would possess a talent so astonishingly powerful. The sublime sounds filling the hall weren't merely shattering his arrogance, they were peeling away the false facade that had long hidden the deep-seated biases within his own heart. Each note Sophia played felt like a silent accusation, methodically dismantling the convictions Alexander had clung to, that true artistry belonged only to people like himself, and that someone like Sophia could never attain it. In that painful revelation, he began to comprehend just how profoundly wrong he'd been about Sophia and about himself. Memories came rushing back to him of all the times he'd mocked and belittled people like her. He had always justified it, convinced that his status, fame, and talent gave him the right to do so. Yet now, each exquisite chord struck him like an undeniable blow, forcing him to confront an inescapable truth. Sophia's flawless performance had demolished the very prejudices he had so carefully erected around himself, and for the first time in his life, Alexander felt a deep, genuine shame. He had believed that talent and high standing excused any behavior, that his biases were simply the way the world worked. But in just a few minutes of courageous, impassioned playing, Sophia had shown him that those beliefs were utterly empty. The music continued to pour forth, stretching those profound moments into something timeless, leaving no one in the hall untouched. A hush seemed ready to shatter in the hall. The crowd had completely forgotten Sophia's once humble station. Now they beheld only a remarkably powerful woman of immense value, a value untouched by either her skin color or her social standing. Meanwhile, Alexander stood frozen, struck by the harsh realization that he had utterly failed to perceive someone's true worth. As the piece neared its end, a profound stillness settled over the room. Sophia pressed the last key with delicate care, allowing the final note to drift into the air, offering everyone a chance to absorb what they had just experienced. Each face in the audience reflected deep feeling and reverence. In that final hush, Alexander felt clearer than ever that all the prejudices he'd stubbornly harbored had collapsed like a towering wall toppled by the raw power of Sophia's music. He stared at her, and the haughty disdain once etched into his expression had vanished. In its place were wonder, remorse, and a profound respect he had never before shown anyone. At that instant, Alexander realized it wasn't only Sophia's life that had been changed forever. He, too, knew he could never return to being the same man who once believed himself at the summit of art and society. As the last echoes from Sophia's fingertips faded softly into the atmosphere, The hall sank into a silence so intense it felt almost sacred, a hush both awestruck and profoundly moved, as if the audience clung desperately to the final shimmer of the miracle they'd just witnessed. Then, like a cresting wave, the first burst of thunderous applause broke out, swelling in force and volume until the entire hall resounded with fervent ovation. Sophia opened her eyes and looked around her, scarcely able to believe the reality before her. Hundreds of audience members were rising to their feet, their faces illuminated with admiration and respect. Tears flowed down many cheeks. No trace remained of the scorn or mere curiosity that had initially drawn them there. This was something far beyond a personal triumph. It was a profound victory of true merit over unjust prejudice. While Sophia remained overwhelmed by the roaring applause, Alexander lingered a few steps behind her, unable to move. He felt paralyzed, his heart pounding furiously as a storm of conflicting, torturous emotions raged inside him. His once confident blue eyes now carried the weight of profound shame. Before him no longer stood the lowly attendant he had once looked down upon, but rather an exceptional artist who had revealed the magnitude of his grave error. He realized he had been mistaken, terribly mistaken, and that his failing extended far beyond dismissing Sophia's musical talent. His deeper fault lay in the deep-seated biases that had skewed his entire perception of human worth. The arrogance and certainty he had built up over time were now utterly shattered. Alexander felt a searing awareness of the harm and insult he had caused Sophia. The cruel words he'd hurled at her echoed relentlessly in his mind, transforming into an unbearable burden of shame from which he could not escape. Never in his life had he felt regret, so raw and real a regret that wrenched at his heart. Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Alexander began moving slowly towards Sophia, each step weighted with remorse. All traces of his former arrogance were gone, replaced by a trembling sincerity. The audience sensed this profound shift and fell silent once again, instinctively aware that they were witnessing a moment none of them would ever forget. "Sophia," Alexander began, his voice quivering, fragile, and choked with emotion, "I was deeply wrong. Not only underestimated your talent, but I also denied your value as a human being. Please forgive me." His words left Sophia trembling with shock. She looked into the eyes of the man who had inflicted such deep wounds upon her, now standing there transformed. His pride had vanished, replaced entirely by genuine humility and remorse. Alexander hesitated, searching for the words that would convey the depth of his repentance. He drew a steadying breath and continued, "And please, continue playing so. We can hear more of this incredible music. I have never heard anything performed with such truth." The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the fragile moment of authentic apology and reconciliation that no one could have predicted when the evening began. Sophia regarded Alexander for several seconds, her eyes softening as she discerned the sincerity in his trembling voice. She said nothing in response, but merely gave a gentle nod, a silent acceptance of his apology, laden with profound meaning. In that charged stillness, Alexander stepped back, yielding the stage entirely to Sophia. He understood in that instant that his status would never again be the same, but none of that mattered now. What mattered most was that he had finally grasped the true value of another human being, lesson that had cost him his pride. As Sophia placed her hands on the piano keys once more, ready to begin another piece, Alexander stood behind her, his heart filled with deep respect and gratitude. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely grateful to have witnessed and heard music so utterly authentic, music born from the soul of the extraordinary woman he had once dismissed, but who had now irrevocably transformed his world. As the first notes of the new piece emerged from Sophia's hands, an intense wave of emotion instantly swept across the hall. Alexander retreated into the shadows, deliberately surrendering the spotlight to the petite woman he had once tried to belittle. Now dazzling everyone with her remarkable gift, he remained silent in the darkness, seized by a strange but utterly sincere emotion, profound respect for the very person he had once scorned most of all. No one in the audience gave a thought anymore to Sophia's former role behind the scenes. They were utterly entranced by her presence and the honest, breathtaking music she was sharing. Warm, sustained applause erupted again, mingling with cheers and astonished expressions to their eyes. Sophia had become far more than simply a gifted pianist. She now embodied courage, resilience, and human dignity, qualities that rose above any social divisions. Sophia played with a spirit newly ignited. Each note was no longer a mere attempt to prove her talent, but a loving tribute to her father, the man who had first planted the seeds of music in her heart. Though he was gone, there could be no doubt he would be smiling down on her, proud to see his daughter step boldly into the spotlight and stand tall under the luminous glow of Carnegie Hall. From his place behind the stage, Alexander watched Sophia's metamorphosis with overwhelming emotion. The jealousy and bitterness that had once consumed him had dissolved, placed by a profound and peaceful admiration. Sophia had given him the most important lesson of his life, that true worth is determined not by skin color or background, by the strength of a person's character. Now all he felt was genuine respect for the exceptional woman before him. The applause continued without pause, as if the audience could never fully express the depth of their gratitude and reverence for Sophia. Some spectators even stepped forward to lay vibrant bouquets upon the stage flowers offered not merely to a performer, but as heartfelt tokens of admiration for her courage and dignity. Amid this unexpected tribute, Sophia caught Alexander's gaze. In his once cold blue eyes, she saw unmistakable remorse. He lowered his head slightly in a silent apology, and Sophia felt her heart begin to heal. His sincere regret proved that her music had not only touched the audience, but had also pierced and transformed even the most hardened heart. The audience's adoration for Sophia showed no sign of waning. For them, this night had become more than just an exceptional concert. It was a powerful awakening to humanity's deepest values. Sophia, once hidden in the shadows, had emerged as a radiant beacon of hope, defiance in the face of prejudice, and steadfast self-worth. Finally, Sophia rose and offered a graceful, profound bow. There was no fear or uncertainty in her eyes anymore, only pure, unbounded pride as she realized, for the first time, just how deeply valued and celebrated she truly was. When she raised her head, another wave of thunderous applause erupted, a relentless testament that she was fully worthy of this recognition. And in that instant, Sophia realized she had achieved true victory. Not merely over Alexander, nor only over the unfair prejudices she had endured, but over the shadows of her own uncertainties and fears. At last, she was utterly liberated, free to shine, free to chart her own destiny, and above all, free to evolve into the strongest and most remarkable version of herself she had always envisioned. Although the concert concluded, its echoes remained, alive in the souls of everyone who had been present in the hall. As people departed Carnegie Hall, they carried with them intense emotions and a completely renewed understanding of human value and dignity. For Alexander, stepping away from that magnificent stage symbolized the end of the person he had been. Confronted with Sophia's brilliance and bravery, he recognized how profoundly his own biases had deceived him. In the days that ensued, Alexander withdrew into solitude within his opulent apartment, a place that once embodied his pride and self-importance. Now its walls seemed to close in on him, crowded with thoughts of guilt and self-reproach as he replayed the harsh words he'd hurled at Sophia and others like her. The cruel jests that once slipped so easily from his tongue now returned to torment him endlessly, carving deep wounds into what remained of his self-respect. Across his distinguished career, Alexander had never encountered remorse as deep as this, yet it was precisely that sorrow that sparked within him a burning resolve. He felt compelled to find a way to make amends for his past wrongs, to be worthy of the forgiveness and compassion Sophia had silently shown him. Not long afterward, Alexander reappeared before the public, but no longer as the celebrated concert pianist. Instead, he announced the creation of a new charitable organization. To the astonishment of journalists and audiences alike, he introduced Music of Hope, a foundation devoted to discovering, supporting, and fostering the musical talents of Black artists who had been overlooked or suppressed by social prejudice. Speaking openly to the press, he revealed that this initiative was not only an apology to Sophia, but a personal mission to confront his own deepest failings and root out the prejudices he had once harbored at first. Many questioned the authenticity of his sudden shift, but as they witnessed his unwavering commitment to the foundation and his dedication to helping young artists overcome invisible obstacles, they began to believe that Alexander's transformation was sincere and profound. Meanwhile, Sophia's life entered a completely new phase. After that unforgettable night, Carnegie Hall invited her to join their roster of regularly featured artists. This distinguished offer was more than just acknowledgement of her exceptional gift. It stood as a powerful symbol of how her courage and belief in her worth had triumphed over the biases she once confronted. Sophia swiftly became a beacon of hope to millions. Her tale of stepping into the spotlight despite fear and discrimination, proving her true worth, inspired countless people who had long been neglected or marginalized by society. Letters from across the country poured in, thanking her for rekindling hope and breathing new passion into people's lives. In every subsequent performance and interview, Sophia made it clear that her journey wasn't solely for herself, but also for her father and for all those who had been left behind because of prejudice. She used her own experiences to remind the world that talent knows neither color nor social class, and that with sufficient courage, anyone can surmount even the tallest obstacles. At the inaugural gala for the Music of Hope Foundation, Alexander invited Sophia to join him once again on stage, this time with profound respect and heartfelt gratitude. "Sophia," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "you didn't merely change my life. You showed me the true essence of music, compassion, and the courage to rise above prejudice. I was mistaken, and you gave me the chance to make things right and contribute something meaningful to the world." The audience erupted into heartfelt applause, many wiping tears from their eyes as they turned their gaze toward Sophia. She smiled softly, her expression a mix of gentleness and inner strength. In that moment, she understood that although Alexander had once inflicted pain upon her, he had become living proof that anyone can transform when touched by the genuine values of humanity. She realized she no longer stood alone. Standing beside her were countless others who had discovered in her story the miraculous force of forgiveness, the bravery to stand proud, and the simple yet profound truth that every human being deserves to be recognized and celebrated. Time moved forward, and the scars of the past gradually healed, giving way to hope and deep change. 6 months after that emotionally charged concert at Carnegie Hall, the name Sophia Bennett no longer belonged to a quiet, unknown woman lurking in the shadows. She now stood before crowds as a renowned concert pianist, an artist cherished and admired throughout the music world. Sophia's debut solo recital quickly became the year's most anticipated event at Carnegie Hall. Tickets sold out within days, as eager audiences clamored for the chance to witness this extraordinary woman perform once more, not as a surprise guest, but as a powerful symbol of talent, prevailing over prejudice to seize the spotlight. As the stage lights dimmed, Sophia stepped forward to a deafening ovation. She wore a simple yet graceful gown, her eyes gleaming with pride and self-assurance. The greatest surprise of the evening came when Alexander appeared behind her in a plain black suit, his demeanor modest and composed. This time, he was not the star in the limelight. Instead, he had come simply to turn the pages of Sophia's sheet music. The audience sat in astonishment. Here was the man who had once stood at the very pinnacle of success, looking down on others, now standing silently beside Sophia, turning each page with care and reverence. Just before Sophia placed her fingers upon the keys, Alexander bowed his head and murmured so quietly that only she could hear, "Sophia, you've shown me the true meaning of music and given me the chance to become a better man." Sophia offered him a warm smile and nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. In that instant, they both knew they were no longer adversaries but partners. United through empathy and reconciliation, and bound by their shared love of music, Sophia began to play, pouring passion and depth into every note. This performance was more than a victory over discrimination. It was the sound of forgiveness, compassion, and hope for a brighter future. Every listener in the hall felt the raw emotion woven into her music, experiencing a stirring, heartfelt journey that reached deep into the soul. Beside her, Alexander also felt the extraordinary power of her melodies. His heart overflowed with gratitude and humility as he realized he was no longer the self-important man he once had been. It was Sophia's kindness and immense courage that had shattered the barriers of arrogance and prejudice he'd carried for so long. When the final chord faded away, a profound silence filled the hall before it exploded into a standing ovation that seemed endless. Tears shimmered on countless faces as people recognized they had witnessed a historic night where human dignity and artistic talent were celebrated in their purest form. Unbound by race or social standing, Sophia rose and bowed in uncontainable joy, then turned to Alexander, who still stood quietly by her side, and shared a grateful smile. In that shared glance, they both understood that this was not just Sophia's triumph, but Alexander's redemption. Genuine act of atonement. Outside Carnegie Hall, thousands of fans who had waited for hours cheered and called her name with sincere emotion. Sophia stepped out to meet their embrace, her heart full of gratitude for everyone who had believed in, supported her. That evening became a defining moment not only in Sophia Bennett's life, but also in Alexander Pierce's and in the lives of millions of others. It was a night when music triumphed over prejudice and human dignity shone with genuine power and authenticity. From that day onward, Sophia's story was no longer merely about an exceptional musician emerging from obscurity. It became a story of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the profound capacity of the human heart to change. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting tales. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.